Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. I'm so happy you're here. Lovely to be here once again with you all. I'm KROOF and today we're going to be talking about perhaps a more niche area of the Guild Wars 2 End of Dragons livestream coverage. This being creatures, creature design, and overall impressions of who we might be fighting in End of Dragons. Now, last video I did mention to keep an eye out and maybe keep in the backs of your minds the Tengu concept art, and we will be touching on that a little bit later in the video. But because there isn't a direct page description to talk about for the Guild Wars 2 End of Dragons creatures, it's mostly going to be a video that summarizes everything that we've seen, concept art, in-game screenshots, and also everything that the developers have said about their creature design and their overall philosophy in designing encounters in Guild Wars 2 End of Dragons. So I guess we'll start with concept art. We'll start with concept art most because that's where everything in video games begins, really, is with a concept, an idea. And during the live stream, we were shown a couple pretty cool concept art pieces. One of these is of a very planty knight creature with what seems to be a very long axe, a great axe, a spear, a cleaver of some sorts. And I have never played Guild Wars factions, but I have brushed up on my Canthan history and my Canthan lore, and a part of me feels like this could be a Guild Wars 2 interpretation of a warden, perhaps? Wardens used to be these plant-like creatures in Guild Wars faction, and a lot of people have been speculating if we might get an elite specialization based off of them. But I looked at this concept art and I was like, oh, maybe not only could we get an elite spec, but we could see a return of the wardens or some ancestral genetic similarity to wardens. You never know. So it's a really ominous and menacing figure, and to me it gives off boss encounter vibes. I don't know if they would necessarily show off screenshots or concept art of a boss this early on, and to me though, this just looks so towering. The sense of scale. It seems to be in the Echovald Forest, and you might see some architecture behind it. Could this be a meta event boss? Could this be a strike mission boss? Could this just be another encounter, a boss to fight in the personal story? You never know, but I gotta say, it looks very menacing, and it kind of harkens back to Mordrum, almost, like corrupted Sylvari. Moving on, we have confirmation that Naga will be returning to Guild Wars 2 End of Dragons. And we have some concept art pieces of the Naga, but we also have an in-game screenshot of the Naga. And oh, they're looking so glamorous, so cool, so sleek. I really enjoy the concept art, the bug eyes, and the different colors of the different scales. And overall, the very snake-like, of course, Naga aesthetic. We already have Crate, but I think this will be another lovely application of the model and the rig to just spice things up a bit and liven Cantha up. The in-game engine screenshot shows a pink, iridescent, really shiny Naga near a body of water with a wand or a scepter in its hand, and I can't wait to fight these Naga. I hope they have really cool and interesting abilities, maybe some conditions like slow and vulnerability and some ranged attacks. We'll get into that in just a moment. But then the next concept art we have is of what seems to be terrestrial, almost armadillo-esque hedgehog. I don't know what those animals really look like, but they kind of look like dinosaurs. And I honestly don't have a reference to what these creatures could be. These could be creatures which are familiar in Guild Wars factions, but nothing really screams to mind when I look at them right now. But I gotta say, they look really cool. I like their shell. Maybe we could have some encounters where we have to break their break bar and their shell pops off and they become more vulnerable. And I would love to see more from these creatures. They look very, almost, they look somewhat friendly, but also like they could be a little angry at times. Finally, we have this lovely illustration of what appears to be some spectral emperor or some spectral samurai or someone who appears to be of a high standing in Cantha society, or who was, or perhaps a warrior. But overall, it looks really cool. The tone on this art piece is just wonderful. It's very dark and ominous. I get a vibe that he probably will be more of an enemy, perhaps a boss. But there's also a bit of a sorrow to this character, as if like we might guide them, or they will imbue onto us like a great sense of knowledge. Of course, we have no background for these characters on these concept art pieces, but this is what I'm just really getting from this illustration concept art. But it's really cool. The hands in particular are very glowy, and so are the eyes and the face. And we have some really cool symbols, a piece behind him with these ribbons flowing down. The color palette is so striking, and I can't wait to see in-game renderings. And I really hope that this character, maybe it is a specific NPC, or perhaps it's a more general enemy that we might be fighting in End of Dragons. Whoever they are, I can't wait to see more. Those are the concept art pieces that we have for the creature design in Guild Wars 2 End of Dragons so far. But they have touched on their philosophies in designing normal creatures out in the open world, and you know, logically that would bleed into encounters and endgame situations like strike missions, which we covered in the previous video. So for the creature design, I gotta say, I'm really pleased with what I'm hearing so far. They have said that in the past, veterans, elites, champions, and legendary mobs, as you go up in the rank, the only thing that really changes is either their health pool or the amount of damage they do. In End of Dragons, they're changing things up a bit, and if you fight a veteran, they might have a specific set of skills, but if you find an elite, they'll have 2 other skills you might not necessarily have seen before, and it creates a more dynamic combat experience out in the open world and hopefully in endgame situations. And this even goes for like regular mobs to veterans. And as the scale increases, we get to see more unique features. Perhaps when you get to legendary, they have a buff where they're constantly taking might and protection on themselves. Or they have a feature where their break bar is so much stronger and it takes much more crowd control to get rid of. And if you don't do it, it unleashes a new attack that you haven't seen from any of the other creatures. And you really have to be on your toes. That is what I'm really excited to see. In addition to everything that we've gotten from the concept art to the talking points with how they're designing these veterans, elites, and further rankings for the creatures, I have to say, I want them to do a blog post or a live stream of further coverage of main enemies we will be fighting in Guild Wars 2. And I think this will definitely come down the line. This will probably be a couple months in the future, where they get to talking about the main antagonist of the expansion. And in Path of Fire, we had the Forged. Leading up to Heart of Thorn's release, they had a full segment on the Mordrum. We as a player base and as a community, we really got to feel attached to them. We got to feel a sense of understanding of the Mordrum. Maybe not philosophical, ethical understanding, but an understanding of who we are fighting, what they are doing. We got insight on how these characters and how these AI mobs will interact. With Path of Fire, we didn't really get any lead-up coverage to the Forged. And when we stepped foot into Alona, we just started fighting these Forged, and we had no previous conception of who these creatures were, what they were going to do, and overall, it felt like a little bit more of a detached gaming experience. I felt much more familiar and more excited to fight the Mordrum than I did the Forged. And I think in End of Dragons, what would really benefit that open world experience is if a couple months down the line, we got a live stream explaining some of the core mobs we will fight. And maybe there is an army for the main antagonist, the same way there were the Mordrum and the Forged. And I hope that we do see more of this, because it will be much more exciting also to give feedback on open world experiences. Maybe we'll see things where there really isn't any boon application for the enemies themselves, or the enemies don't really apply any conditions, or there's no barrier application to the enemies themselves. And we can put our input and say, hey, maybe we could add a couple more interesting facets to the open world experience. But overall, they've really been improving on that front, I have to say, especially in Path of Fire. Overall, those are the creatures and the mobs we have so far for End of Dragons. Last thing I want to touch on is the Tengu. Now, you might recall from the previous video on the strike missions that I pointed out that the concept art for strike missions is strikingly familiar. It carries a resemblance to the Tengu of Guild Wars 2. Now, there's been no confirmation, absolutely none. However, the developers have continued to say that they've only scratched the surface of this expansion and that there's more to go and more to show. And call me an optimist, but, I'm still kind of holding on to the possibility that they are working on another playable race, and possibly the Tengu. Only reason I say this is because of the strike mission concept art. There are 3 creatures in the foreground, and they have, well, 2 of the 3 creatures have the classic Tengu, almost ponytail-esque hairstyle with the feathers. Now, there isn't necessarily feathered detail in the hair, but from the avian-like structure of the ears to that classic ponytail to the very long and elongated elbows that drop down to the hips, it is really screaming that this is a race we have yet to see as a playable race in Guild Wars 2. And additionally, if you look closely at the arms of one of the Tengu, well, I'm saying Tengu, but one of the arms of the characters, it almost looks feathered, like there are layers to the person's arm. Now, you might be saying, KROOF, you're getting ahead of yourself, and that this is just a depiction of NPCs we might be seeing in strike missions. But I want to point out that they very rarely put in notable NPCs into the loading screen of, say, strike missions or raids or any other endgame content. If we see characters in the loading screens, they are typically representatives of the playable races and the playable characters that we as the player base play as. So I would find it odd for them to put in 2, possibly 3 Tengu into this screenshot, and for them not to be playable races, especially because it's under the strike mission tab, and that's from 5 players to more fighting a boss, and it's typically 5 to 10 players, there are no NPCs in those encounters, fighting a boss. Now, I say a 3rd Tengu is possible because a little bit further in more of the middle of the 2 creatures with their ponytails, this could be the female Tengu. We really haven't seen any variety from the male and female Tengu models, and perhaps the female models don't really have that long ponytail, but instead just have really elongated ears and perhaps some other features and facial features, accessories and earrings that we might not see yet. But overall, this is purely speculation, and I have my eyes and ears open for any other Tengu hints. I do find it a little bit mysterious that they haven't even talked about the Tengu yet, and the Tengu are supposed to hail from Cantha. I mean, they migrated from Cantha into the Dominion of Winds, and there's been so much talked about from the Tengu recently in Iceboot Saga, like Calidris Sparrowhawk, and the messaging that the Tengu might open themselves up more, and I think this is the perfect opportunity to implement them because we are going to Cantha. This is a no-brainer. So overall, this is just a little tidbit that I might be reading a little bit too much into, but once again, call me an optimist, but I would love to hear what you guys have to say. So thank you everyone so much for coming to this video. I hope you guys enjoyed. I'm an official ArenaNet partner, which means I have links down below where you can pre-order End of Dragons, buy the current expansions, and try Guild Wars 2 for free. All the links down below help support me directly, and I greatly appreciate you guys so much for using them. Truly, truly. But like, share, comment your thoughts down below about the creature designs, the new skills, the new looks, the possible Tengu. I want to hear all of it. And subscribe for more videos. And if you want to become a patron and get all these videos early and some exclusive content, you know where to go. So I'll see you guys in the next video. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.